They laughed at human aggression until one bar fight changed everything, reached its climax when Jake, fueled by ancestral hunting instincts, engaged in a brutal 300-second melee against Varkari peacekeepers. As shattered glass and overturned tables created a battlefield, Jake faced the commander blade to blade, revealing humanity's true nature as warriors who had chosen restraint, forever altering the galaxy's perception of Earth's seemingly passive species. Jake Kessler leaned against the pitted metal bar of the Rust Bucket Cantina, nursing a glass of synthetic whiskey. The amber liquid caught the dim light filtering through Nexus Station's viewport, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that did little to improve his mood. Customs delays had kept his freighter, the Wayward Spirit, docked for 3 days now, 3 days of lost profits and mounting docking fees. The cantina hummed with the usual evening crowd, Vorak traders with their translucent skin and glowing circulatory systems, hulking Drendari mercenaries comparing weapon modifications, and a handful of other humans, mostly keeping to themselves at scattered tables. The unspoken hierarchy of the room was evident in the way species clustered, with humans occupying the least desirable spots near the restrooms and kitchen vents. "Another round. Jake?" The bartender, a 4-armed Quillian named Zeph, slid over with practiced ease. "I'm good." Jake pushed his glass forward anyway. "Maybe just a half." Zeph's upper eyes blinked in amusement. "Half measures. Very human of you." There was no malice in his voice, just the casual condescension Jake had grown accustomed to over the years. In the 3 decades since humanity had joined the Galactic Council, they'd become known as the diplomats, the mediators, the species least likely to make waves. The reputation had its advantages. Human traders were rarely targets of piracy, and their colonies seldom faced direct aggression. But it came with costs. Mining rights disputes always seemed to resolve in favor of Trellan corporations. Trade negotiations inevitably left human worlds with unfavorable terms. And in places like the Rust Bucket, it meant humans got served last. Jake scanned the room, an old habit from years of frontier runs. Near the viewport sat Lena Reyes, a dockworker with the calloused hands and 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd spent too long in low-gravity assembly. At the corner table, Omar Zhu tinkered with a malfunctioning datapad, his engineer's toolkit spread before him like surgical instruments. Both nodded at Jake, the subtle acknowledgement of fellow humans in alien territory. A hologram flickered above the central table, displaying interstellar news. Jake's attention caught on a segment about mining negotiations in the Kestrel system. His jaw tightened. 7 months ago, his sister Mara had been part of the human delegation there when Varkari peacekeepers had conducted what they called a security sweep. Official reports listed 14 human casualties and 38 wounded. Mara had survived barely. She'd lost an arm and still woke screaming most nights, according to his mother's messages. The Galactic Council had issued a formal censure against the Varkari, a toothless gesture that changed nothing. The news shifted to coverage of human diplomatic initiatives, showing Ambassador Celine Carter's latest address to the Council. Humanity remains committed to peaceful resolution through dialogue. Her recorded image declared, "Violence solves nothing in our interconnected galaxy." Several patrons snickered. A Trellan mineral trader made a gesture Jake recognized as their equivalent of an eye roll. "Always talking, these humans," he said to his companions, like children playing at politics. Jake took another sip, letting the synthetic burn distract him from his rising irritation. This wasn't the place to make a scene. His shipping permit was still processing, and the station security chief was notoriously biased against humans who caused trouble. The cantina's main doors hissed open, admitting a gust of recycled air and a squad of Varkari officers. Jake's hand tightened around his glass. Their distinctive crystal-infused armor caught the light, refracting it into blue-green patterns across the walls. 6 of them, moving with the casual arrogance of apex predators in a field of prey. The rust bucket fell silent, conversations suspended mid-sentence. Even the Drendari mercenaries straightened slightly, hands drifting toward concealed weapons before thinking better of it. The lead Varkari, a commander, judging by the elaborate geometric patterns etched into his armor, surveyed the room with 4 independently rotating eyes. His upper left focused on Jake with unnerving precision. "Well," the commander's voice came through his translator with an artificial bass rumble. "What an interesting assortment of citizens." He emphasized the last word with obvious sarcasm, prompting chuckles from his squad. Zeph moved forward, all 4 arms raised in a placating gesture. "Welcome to the Rust Bucket, officers. First round is complimentary for galactic security personnel." The commander barely acknowledged him, instead striding toward the center of the room. "We're conducting a routine patrol. Nothing to concern yourselves with, unless you've been engaging in restricted activities." His upper eyes swiveled toward the human patrons. "Or harboring dangerous ideologies." Jake kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. The Varkari were infamous for their routine patrols that somehow always ended with confiscated goods and arbitrary fines. Their definition of restricted activities seemed to expand whenever convenient. "You," the commander pointed at Omar, who froze mid-motion. "What's that device you're working on?" "Standard data relay," Omar replied, his voice admirably steady. "Station-approved maintenance." 2 Varkari officers flanked the engineer's table, looming over him. One picked up the partially disassembled data pad. "Looks like it could be modified for encrypted transmissions," he said. "That would violate Section 17 of the Nexus Station Charter." Omar's face remained impassive, but Jake saw the tension in his shoulders. "It's a commercial model. The components aren't compatible with military-grade encryption." The commander made a dismissive gesture. "We'll need to confiscate it for further inspection." "That's my client's property," Omar said, a note of protest creeping into his voice. "I have the work order and—" "Are you questioning security protocols, human?" The commander's tone hardened. "Perhaps you need a reminder of what happens when your kind forgets its place in the galaxy." The air in the cantina grew heavy. Jake felt a prickling sensation at the base of his skull, the fight-or-flight response his ancestors had relied on for survival, now muted by years of cultural conditioning and explicit training for off-world interactions. "Stay calm. Don't escalate. Humans are diplomats, not warriors." The mantra had been drilled into every colonist and spacer since first contact. Humanity had joined the galactic community relatively late, after nearly destroying themselves in the resource wars. Their acceptance into the Galactic Council had come with implicit understanding. Humans would be the peacemakers, using their adaptive social intelligence to mediate disputes between older, more militarily established species. That role had seemed natural after the horrors humanity had inflicted upon itself. Better to be underestimated than feared. Better to be overlooked than targeted. The human representatives had agreed to limitations on military development and colonial expansion in exchange for protection and technological exchange. But as Jake watched the Varkari officers surround Omar, something ancient stirred within him, something that predated space travel, predated civilization itself. The memory of ancestors who had hunted megafauna across Ice Age plains with nothing but stone-tipped spears and unbreakable determination. The commander was still speaking, his attention now directed at the room at large. "Perhaps some of you have forgotten the incident at Kestrel 7th, a necessary security action against insurgent elements." His upper right eye swiveled toward Jake. "I was there, personally, leading the sweep." Jake's blood roared in his ears. This was the creature responsible for Mara's nightmares, for the phantom pain in her missing arm, for the 14 body bags returned to Earth with formal regrets from the Council. "The humans there were much like the ones here," the commander continued, satisfaction evident in his modulated voice. Full of documents and regulations and appeals to council authority, as if paper could stop plasma. Laughter from his squad. The other patrons shifted uncomfortably but made no move to intervene. This wasn't their fight. One female kept shouting about medical neutrality. The commander's feeding tendrils writhed in what Jake recognized as amusement, waving some kind of credential. I believe she lost an appendage trying to access a restricted area. Mara. He was talking about Mara. Jake's vision narrowed to a tunnel. The glass in his hand suddenly felt as fragile as the diplomatic protocols keeping him from lunging across the room. He became hyper-aware of his own breathing, of the weight of his boots against the metal floor, of the distance between himself and the commander. 20 steps, that's all it would take. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings. This wasn't some backwater cantina brawl with equal consequences for all participants. This was a Varkari commander with the full backing of the Galactic Security Council. Assaulting him would mean more than a night in the station brig. It could mean revocation of his pilot's license, criminal charges, possibly even diplomatic incidents affecting Earth itself. But another voice, far older, whispered that some things mattered more than protocols and permits. Some lines, once crossed, demanded response regardless of consequence. The commander had moved closer to Jake's position at the bar, still pontificating about human weakness. They think their treaties protect them, but treaties are only as strong as the forces backing them. And what force do humans bring? Their warships are outdated, their weapons primitive, their soldiers. He made a sound like grinding stones, the Varkari equivalent of derisive laughter. Their soldiers faint at the sight of real combat. Jake remained still, a hunter's stillness that his ancestors would have recognized. The whiskey in his glass caught the light, and he found himself focusing on the patterns it made, rather than the rage building inside him. Breathe, just breathe. Even here, look at them. The commander gestured toward Jake without deigning to face him directly. This one sits and drinks while I speak of his fallen kindred. No honor, no spine. One armored hand reached out, casually knocking Jake's shoulder. Isn't that right, human? Jake said nothing, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. The Varkari's feeding tendrils writhed faster, enjoying the reaction. The female on Kestrel made similar expressions before she broke. Defiance, then fear, then begging. Something in Jake shifted, a tectonic plate, finally giving way after years of pressure. In that moment, he wasn't a freighter pilot worried about permits and protocols. He was simply a human whose sister had been harmed, whose people had been mocked, whose patience had finally shattered. The commander must have sensed the change. His upper eyes rotated to fix on Jake's face, searching for the submission he expected to find. Instead, he saw something that made him step back, something humans had carefully hidden from the galactic community for 3 decades. The look of a predator species who had once hunted everything that moved on their home planet to extinction or domestication. You speak of Kestrel as if it were a victory, Jake said, his voice low and controlled. Attacking unarmed medical personnel. Very brave. A ripple of tension passed through the cantina. The other patrons grew still, sensing the disruption in the established order. Humans didn't challenge Varkari officers. It simply wasn't done. The commander recovered quickly, his feeding tendrils stiffening in anger. You dare question security operations, freight hauler. Perhaps you need a lesson in proper respect. With deliberate slowness, the Varkari reached out and slapped Jake across the face. Not hard enough to cause injury, but with the casual contempt one might show a domestic animal that had misbehaved. Time seemed to slow. Jake felt the sting of the blow, but more keenly. He felt the weight of 30 years of diplomatic submission, of smiling and nodding while human interests were sidelined, of watching Mara struggle with her prosthetic arm in vid calls, her eyes haunted by memories she couldn't share. The synthetic whiskey glass shattered in his grip, amber liquid mixing with drops of blood from his cut palm. The sound was shockingly loud in the tense silence. Both Jake and the commander stared at the broken glass for one heartbeat. Two. Then Jake moved. Later, station security would review the footage frame by frame, trying to understand how a single, human civilian had covered the distance to a Varkari commander so quickly. How he had managed to drive a shard of broken glass through the seam in crystal-infused armor before the officer's enhanced reflexes could respond. But in the moment, Jake wasn't thinking about tactics or consequences. He was simply acting on instincts that stretched back to the African savanna, to Ice Age hunting parties, to countless battlefields across human history. The commander howled as the glass shard penetrated the vulnerable join between chest and shoulder plates. His squad reacted instantly, drawing energy batons and moving to surround Jake. The cantina erupted into chaos. Tables overturned as patrons scrambled for cover or exits. Security alarms blared, adding to the cacophony. Jake ducked under the first officer's swing, driving his shoulder into the Varkari's midsection. The armor was hard against his flesh, but he felt the satisfying impact as his opponent staggered backward. The second officer caught him with a glancing blow to the ribs, sending lances of pain through his side. Not good odds, the rational part of his mind observed. 6 trained Varkari security officers against 1 freighter pilot. But humans had faced worse odds before. The commander had recovered, pulling the glass shard from his armor and drawing an energy blade from his belt. The weapon hummed to life, casting an eerie blue glow across his enraged features. "You've committed your last offense, human," he snarled. "This won't be recorded as a security action. Just an unfortunate accident during a routine patrol." Jake backed up against the bar, searching for a weapon, anything to even the odds. His hand closed around a heavy bottle. Not much against energy weapons, but better than nothing. The commander lunged forward, blade extended, and suddenly staggered sideways as a bar stool crashed against his back. Omar stood behind him, already reaching for another improvised weapon. "Figured you could use a hand," the engineer called, his previous caution replaced by grim determination. The odds had just improved slightly. 2 humans against 6 Varkari, still suicidal, but marginally less so. Then, Lena Reyes vaulted over an overturned table, wielding what looked like a detached table leg. "Make that 3, she growled, dropping into a fighting stance beside Jake. Something remarkable was happening. The carefully maintained hierarchy of the Rust Bucket Cantina was dissolving in real time. Humans, who had spent years keeping their heads down, avoiding conflict, working within the system, were suddenly revealed as something else entirely. Not diplomats, not mediators. Warriors. One of the Varkari officers charged at Lena, energy baton raised. She sidestepped with the grace of someone who had spent years loading cargo in variable gravity, bringing her makeshift club down on his extended arm with bone-crushing force. The officer screamed as his baton clattered to the floor. Jake had no time to appreciate her technique. The commander was advancing again, this time more cautiously, energy blade weaving complex patterns in the air between them. Jake feinted with the bottle, then ducked low, aiming a sweeping kick at the officer's legs. The Varkari jumped back, but not quickly enough to avoid Jake's follow-up, the bottle smashing against his chest armor. Glass and liquid exploded outward, momentarily blinding the commander as the synthetic alcohol found its way into his breathing apparatus. Around them, the brawl had expanded. 2 more humans, maintenance workers Jake vaguely recognized, had joined the fray, grappling with the remaining Varkari officers. Even more surprising, a Drendari mercenary had waded into the fight, apparently deciding that watching humans challenge the established order was too entertaining to miss. Omar had acquired an energy baton from a downed officer and was using it with surprising skill, keeping 2 Varkari at bay. Lena had backed her opponent against the viewport, raining blows that the armored officer was increasingly struggling to block. Jake turned his attention back to the commander, who had recovered and was now circling him with murderous intent, blade humming ominously. Blood trickled from a cut on Jake's forehead, partially obscuring his vision. His ribs throbbed where the baton had connected, and his palm still stung from the broken glass. But something else was flowing through him too, something that made the pain distant and unimportant. The accumulated frustration of years spent swallowing insults, of watching human interests sidelined, of hearing about atrocities justified as security operations. It had finally found its outlet. "You're dead, human," the commander hissed through his translator. "Your companions too. And when we're finished here, perhaps another security sweep will be needed. Your sister's colony, perhaps." The threat should have terrified Jake. Instead, it crystallized his resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore, or even about Mara. It was about every human who had been pushed aside, exploited, or threatened since joining the galactic community. Jake circled right, keeping the bar at his back. His hand found a serrated knife used for cutting exotic fruits. Not much against armor, but perfect for the vulnerable spots he'd identified during the fight. The commander lunged, blade slashing in a diagonal arc that would have bisected Jake if it connected. But Jake was no longer there, having dropped and rolled under the attack. He came up inside the Varkari's guard, driving the serrated knife into the seam between helmet and chest plate. The commander shrieked, a sound so high-pitched it made nearby glasses shatter. The energy blade clattered to the floor as the officer staggered backward, trying to remove the embedded knife. Jake didn't give him the chance. He pressed forward, delivering a series of punches to the already damaged armor joints. Each impact sent shards of crystal flying, revealing the vulnerable chitin beneath. Around him, the tide of battle had shifted. Despite their superior weapons and armor, the Varkari officers were falling back, overwhelmed by the ferocity of the human counterattack and the unexpected intervention of several non-human patrons who had apparently decided that this was an excellent opportunity to settle old scores. The commander made one last desperate attack, pulling the knife free and slashing wildly at Jake's face. Jake caught the officer's wrist, using the Varkari's own momentum to slam him face first into the metal bar. The commander crumpled, 4 eyes rolling independently as consciousness fled. For a moment, Jake stood panting over his fallen opponent, the full realization of what he'd done crashing over him. He'd assaulted a galactic security officer. Worse, a Varkari commander. The diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic. But as he looked around the devastated cantina, he saw something unexpected on the faces of the other combatants. Not fear or regret, but a kind of fierce pride. Even the non-humans were regarding the humans with new expressions: wariness, respect, reassessment. Lena limped over, her makeshift club dented, but still gripped firmly. "Well," she said, wiping blood from a split lip. "That was refreshing." Omar joined them, sporting what would soon be an impressive black eye. "Station security will be here any minute. This isn't going to end well for us." Jake nodded, the adrenaline beginning to ebb. Probably not, but it was worth it. The three stood in the wreckage of the Rust Bucket Cantina, surrounded by groaning Varkari officers and stunned patrons. For better or worse, the galaxy's perception of humanity had just been irrevocably changed. And somewhere in the ceiling, security cameras had captured everything. The footage spread across the galactic information networks faster than a quantum entanglement cascade. Despite efforts by Varkari officials to suppress it, copies appeared on every major world and outpost within hours. The Rust Bucket Brawl, as it came to be known, was viewed trillions of times in the first day alone. Initial reactions varied wildly by species and political affiliation. Varkari High Command denounced it as an unprovoked terrorist attack and demanded immediate sanctions against Earth. Trellan corporate entities called for the revocation of human trading rights. But many frontier worlds and independent systems shared the footage openly, often with approving commentary. On Meridian Prime, seat of the Galactic Council, emergency sessions were convened. The Grand Chamber, with its soaring crystalline dome and tiered seating for over 200 species representatives, hummed with unprecedented energy. Ambassador Celine Carter stood at the central podium, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression carefully controlled as she addressed the assembled delegates. Behind her calm exterior, her mind raced through diplomatic permutations and damage control scenarios. "Esteemed representatives," she began, her voice steady despite the chaos of the preceding hours. "The incident at Nexus Station was unfortunate and does not reflect humanity's commitment to peaceful cooperation. The individuals involved will face appropriate what? Ambassador." The Varkari representative interrupted, his translator pitched to maximum volume. "Your species has revealed its true nature. The mask of diplomacy has slipped, showing the savage beneath." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Carter maintained her composed demeanor, though those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes. "If I may continue," she said. "The individuals acted in response to documented provocation, including explicit threats and references to the Kestrel 7 incident, where unarmed medical personnel were attacked during what was supposed to be a peaceful operation." The chamber's mood shifted subtly. The Kestrel 7 incident had been quietly buried in committee reviews and procedural delays, despite Earth's formal protests. Now, connected to the viral footage, it had resurfaced in the collective consciousness of the Council. "The humans were clearly the aggressors," the Varkari representative insisted. "The security footage." "The complete security footage," Ambassador Carter interrupted, "which I note includes audio contrary to standard Varkari patrol protocols, shows Commander Zuthar making explicit threats against civilians and boasting about injuring unarmed medical workers. I have submitted the unedited version to the Council archives for review." Strategic whispers broke out among the delegates. Several representatives leaned toward their aides, presumably requesting immediate access to the footage in question. "This changes nothing," the Varkari representative hissed. "One incident does not justify another. We demand the extradition of the humans involved for trial under Varkari law, and punitive sanctions against Earth for harboring violent elements." Ambassador Carter's expression didn't change, but something in her posture subtly shifted. Those closest to the podium later reported that the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. "The humans involved are already in custody," she said, her voice taking on a new edge. "They will face a fair trial under Nexus Station's independent judiciary, as specified in Section 42 of the station's charter, which, I remind the Council, the Varkari hegemony signed and ratified." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep the chamber. "As for sanctions against Earth, I would advise careful consideration. Humanity has honored every treaty, respected every limitation, and cooperated with every reasonable request since joining this Council. We have served as mediators, peacekeepers, and facilitators of cross-species understanding." Another pause, this one heavy with implication. "But do not mistake our preference for diplomacy as our only option. The incident at the Rust Bucket Cantina involved 3 civilians with no military training. I invite the Council to consider what that might suggest about our capabilities, should we ever choose to fully express them." The chamber fell silent. For 30 years, humanity had played the role assigned to them: the diplomatic species, the reasonable voice, the mediators. Now, Ambassador Carter was suggesting something that many had suspected, but few had voiced: that this role had been a choice, not a limitation. In the tense silence, a new voice spoke, the Drendari representative, his massive form rising from the lower tier. "My people have a saying: judge the berry by its thorns, not its color. We have perhaps judged humans incorrectly. He activated his podium's holographic display, projecting combat analysis of the cantina footage. Observe the precision of their attacks, the coordination without prior planning, the adaptation to superior weaponry. His rumbling voice carried a note of professional appreciation. These are not the actions of an inherently peaceful species playing at diplomacy. These are the actions of warriors who have chosen restraint. The council chamber erupted in overlapping conversations. Species that had previously dismissed humans as inconsequential now engaged in urgent consultations with their delegations. Military attachés, who had never bothered to attend diplomatic sessions, were suddenly requesting admission to the chamber. In the midst of the chaos, the Arbiter, a Selenian elder, whose species' renowned neutrality had earned them the permanent position of council moderator, raised her luminescent appendages for silence. "It seems," she said, her translator rendering her harmonic speech into measured tones, "that we have much to reconsider regarding our human colleagues. I propose a 3-day recess for consultation with home governments, followed by a special session on human galactic relations." The motion passed with unprecedented speed. As the chamber began to empty, delegations already forming into clusters of hurried discussion, Ambassador Carter found herself approached by Admiral Malik Cho, Earth's military liaison to the Council. "That was quite a speech, Celine," he said quietly. 30 years of careful positioning, shifted in 5 minutes. "Not shifted," she corrected. "Revealed. The galaxy was bound to discover the truth eventually. Better it happens on our terms, through a bar fight, than through genuine conflict." The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. "The defense committees will need to be briefed. If the Council's perception of humanity is changing, our strategic posture will need to adapt accordingly." "Already in progress," Carter replied. "And we should arrange a direct communication with Jake Kessler and the others. They've become rather important symbols, whether they intended to or not." As they left the chamber, the ambassador's aide approached with an update. "The xenopsychology and military assessment feeds are exploding. Ma'am, Dr. Imran Farah's analysis of human combat instincts has been accessed by over 40 species governments in the last hour." Carter allowed herself a small smile. "I imagine the doctor is enjoying the sudden interest in his work." "You could say that," the aide replied, unable to keep a note of amusement from her voice. His exact words were, "Finally, they're reading the footnotes." For 3 decades, humanity's representatives had carefully cultivated an image of reasonable mediators. Meanwhile, human xenopsychologists, military historians, and evolutionary biologists had documented their species' less diplomatic attributes in exhaustive detail, always published openly, always available to anyone who cared to look. Few had bothered, until now. In a secure holding area on Nexus Station, Jake Kessler sat across from an interrogation drone, its optical sensors recording his every micro-expression. The cell was spartanly furnished: a bed, a sanitation unit, and the small table where he now sat. His injuries had been treated, the cut on his palm sealed, his bruised ribs wrapped, but the ache remained, a constant reminder of the previous day's events. "State your name and occupation for the record," the drone intoned. "Jake Kessler, independent freight pilot. Registration NE775982C. You are being held on charges of assaulting galactic security personnel, inciting civil unrest, and damaging station property. How do you plead?" Jake considered the question. The rational course would be to plead guilty to lesser charges, throw himself on the mercy of the station judiciary, hope for deportation rather than imprisonment. But something had changed in him since the brawl, a straightening of his spine, a certainty that had been missing before. "I plead that the Varkari commander threatened my sister, boasted about injuring her, and implied further harm would come to her colony," he said evenly. "I plead that he struck me first, in full view of witnesses and security cameras. I plead self-defense and defense of others. The drone's processors whirred as it assimilated this unexpected response. Your statement has been recorded. Be advised that Varkari High Command has requested your extradition for trial under their jurisdiction. Jake felt a chill, but kept his expression neutral. Varkari justice was notoriously one-sided when it came to non-Varkari defendants. I'm a citizen of Earth and was detained on a neutral station. They have no jurisdiction. That matter is under review by station legal authorities. The drone replied, You will remain in custody until a determination is made. The interrogation continued for another hour. Questions about his background, his relationship with the other humans involved, whether the confrontation had been pre-planned. Jake answered truthfully, emphasizing the commander's provocations and explicit threats. After the drone departed, he was left alone with his thoughts. The cell's small viewport showed a slice of starfield, unchanging and eternal. Jake found himself wondering if he'd ever pilot the wayward spirit again, or if his future held only Varkari detention centers and disappearance into the bureaucratic void. The door hissed open, admitting a human woman in the formal attire of an Earth Diplomatic Corps official. Her stern features softened slightly as she assessed his condition. Mr. Kessler, I'm Diane Ochoa, diplomatic attaché to Nexus Station. How are you feeling? Jake straightened. I've been better. Any news on what happens next? Ochoa took the seat opposite him, placing a secure datapad on the table between them. That's what I'm here to discuss. Your situation has become considerably more complicated than a simple bar fight. She activated the datapad, displaying headlines from across the galactic information networks. Human aggression revealed. Rust Bucket Brawl shocks galactic community. Warrior instincts. Have we misunderstood Earth species? Varkari demands trial for terrorist attack on security forces. Council calls emergency session on human galactic relations. Jake stared at the scrolling headlines, a sinking feeling in his stomach. That looks bad. Bad. That depends on your perspective. Ochoa's expression remained neutral, but there was a glint of something like satisfaction in her eyes. You've become rather famous, Mr. Kessler. Or infamous, depending on who you ask. She swiped to another screen, showing viewership metrics for the security footage. The numbers were astronomical. The Diplomatic Corps has spent 30 years carefully positioning humanity as the reasonable, non-threatening species. She continued, You managed to upend that narrative in approximately 5 minutes of remarkably efficient violence. Jake winced. I didn't think about the bigger picture. He threatened my sister, mocked what happened to her on Kestrel 7. I'm aware of the provocation, Ochoa interrupted. And to be clear, I'm not here to reprimand you. Quite the opposite. She deactivated the datapad and leaned forward. The Varkari commander made a critical error. He believed the narrative we've allowed to flourish, that humans are inherently passive, that our preference for diplomacy stems from inability rather than choice. He pushed until you demonstrated otherwise, and now the galaxy is reassessing everything they thought they knew about us. Is that good? Jake asked, uncertainty evident in his voice. It's complicated, Ochoa admitted, but potentially very good. In the long run, Earth's representatives have been fighting an uphill battle in the Council for decades. The Kestrel 7 incident was barely acknowledged, despite 14 deaths and dozens of injuries. Mining rights, colonial expansion, technology sharing. In every arena, human interests have been secondary because we were perceived as unwilling to back our demands with force. She allowed herself a small smile. You've changed that calculation. Every species in the galaxy is now wondering what other assumptions about humanity might be incorrect. Jake absorbed this, trying to reconcile the diplomatic implications with his personal situation. That's all well and good for Earth. But what about me? And Lena and Omar? Are we being extradited to the Varkari? No, Ochoa said firmly. Ambassador Carter has made it abundantly clear that Earth will not permit the extradition of its citizens to face Varkari justice for responding to direct provocation. You'll be tried under Nexus Station law, with full diplomatic support. Relief washed through Jake, though it was tempered by realism. Station judiciary isn't exactly known for its impartiality when it comes to humans. True, historically speaking. But circumstances have changed. Ochoa tapped the datapad again. The station administrator has received formal inquiries from 17 species governments regarding the handling of your case. The Drendari Protectorate has offered legal observers. 3 independent systems have suggested that their trade routes might bypass Nexus entirely if justice appears compromised. Jake blinked in surprise. Why would they care about one human freighter pilot? Because you're not just a freighter pilot anymore. Mr. Kessler, you're a symbol. Ochoa's expression turned serious. For better or worse, you've become the face of humanity's reassessment in galactic politics. How your case is handled will set precedents for human-galactic relations moving forward. The weight of that responsibility settled on Jake's shoulders, heavier than the cargo he'd transported across dozens of systems. I just wanted him to stop talking about Mara, he said quietly. Ochoa's professional demeanor softened momentarily. I know. And for what it's worth, your sister sends her regards. She's been given security clearance to view a redacted version of the footage. She asked me to tell you that she's proud. Something tight in Jake's chest loosened at those words. Whatever happened next, trial, imprisonment, diplomatic fallout, knowing that Mara understood made it bearable. What happens now? He asked. You and the others will remain in custody, pending trial. Earth has retained the finest legal representation available on Nexus Station. Ochoa stood, gathering her datapad. The diplomatic corps will handle the broader implications. Ambassador Carter is addressing the Council as we speak, reframing the narrative around humanity's place in the galactic community. She paused at the door. One more thing, Mr. Kessler. Whatever the outcome of your trial, you should know that your actions have already changed the calculus of power in ways that 30 years of traditional diplomacy could not. Some will call you a criminal, others, a hero. History will likely settle on something in between. After she left, Jake returned to the viewport, watching the distant stars. He wondered which of those pinpoints of light was Sol, and whether the repercussions of his actions were already reaching Earth. He thought of Mara, of the commander's threats against her colony, of the sneering dismissal humans had endured throughout the galaxy. For the first time since the brawl, he felt no regret for what he'd done. 6 months later, Jake Kessler stepped through the doors of a familiar establishment on Nexus Station. The sign above the entrance now read, Kessler's Keep, a change that still made him slightly uncomfortable, despite the undeniable boost to business it had brought the cantina's owner. The interior had been rebuilt after the infamous brawl, with reinforced tables and a new, longer bar made of polished asteroid metal. The layout remained similar, but the atmosphere had transformed entirely. Humans no longer occupied the least desirable spots but were distributed throughout the room, engaged in animated conversations with various species. Several nodded to Jake as he entered. Some he recognized, others strangers who knew him by reputation. Zeph waved him over, with 2 of his 4 arms. The other pair busy mixing drinks for a group of Trellan traders. The conquering hero returns, the Quillian announced, loud enough to draw attention from nearby patrons. Jake winced at the dramatics. Just passing through. Zeph, thought I'd stop in for old time's sake. Old times? It's been half a standard year. Zeph slid a glass of actual Earth whiskey, now prominently featured on the menu, across the bar. On the house, as always. You'll go bankrupt with that policy, Jake protested, though he accepted the drink. Hardly. Do you know what it's done for business? Having the famous Jake Kessler associated with my establishment? The Quillian's upper eyes blinked in amusement. Every tourist and trader wants to see where it happened. I've had to hire 3 new staff just to handle the increased traffic. Jake sipped the whiskey, savoring the authentic burn. After the trial, which had resulted in a surprisingly lenient sentence of time served and restitution payments for property damage, he'd spent several months on Earth, debriefing military officials and diplomatic corps strategists eager to understand exactly what had transpired in the cantina. The political fallout had been substantial, but largely positive for humanity. The Varkari, faced with unprecedented scrutiny of their peacekeeping operations, had withdrawn from several disputed territories. Trade negotiations across the galaxy had suddenly become more favorable to human interests. Colonial expansion rights that had been tied up in committee for years were expedited for approval. Most significantly, the limitations on human military development had been quietly renegotiated. Earth's first official military diplomatic vessel, the Arbitrator, had launched 2 months prior, with Admiral Cho commanding and Lena Reyes, pardoned and recruited directly from the trial, serving as security chief. You missed Omar earlier, Zeph mentioned, interrupting Jake's thoughts. He's been contracted to upgrade the station's communications array. Seems his engineering skills are in high demand these days. Jake smiled. The third member of what the galactic media had dubbed the Rust Bucket 3 had perhaps benefited most directly from the incident, with his technical expertise now sought after by species who had previously dismissed human engineering as primitive. And how are things on the station generally? Jake asked, glancing around the cantina. Any more incidents? Zeph's feeding tendrils rippled in what Jake had learned was amusement. Remarkably peaceful, actually. The Varkari patrols are notably more professional. Station security has implemented new oversight protocols, and disputes between species seem to resolve themselves before escalating to violence. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Though I notice everyone is much more careful about what they say when humans are present. Funny how one brawl can change perceptions so thoroughly. Jake nodded, understanding the underlying truth. The galaxy hadn't suddenly developed a deeper respect for human diplomacy. They'd simply realized that diplomacy was a choice, not a limitation. Peace maintained through strength carried different weight than peace born of perceived weakness. The cantina's doors hissed open, admitting a familiar figure, Ambassador Carter. Her formal attire exchanged for more casual clothing, scanned the room before spotting Jake at the bar. She made her way over, nodding acknowledgments to several patrons who recognized her from council broadcasts. I thought I might find you here, she said, taking the seat beside him. Your ship docked an hour ago. Keeping tabs on me, Ambassador? Jake asked, not entirely joking. She smiled thinly. Let's just say certain arrivals at Nexus Station still warrant diplomatic attention. How was the Procyon run? Uneventful. Cargo delivered on time. No customs delays. He studied her expression, noting the careful neutrality that marked career diplomats. But you didn't track me down to discuss shipping manifests. No, she agreed. I wanted to personally deliver news that will be announced publicly tomorrow. The Council has approved the formation of a joint human Drendari security force for the Kestrel system. Your sister's colony will be one of the first to receive a permanent protection detail. Jake set down his glass, absorbing the significance of this development. The Kestrel system, site of the massacre that had nearly claimed Mara's life, would now be protected by a force that included humans in an official security capacity. 6 months ago, such an arrangement would have been unthinkable. That's good news, he said finally. Mara will be relieved. It's more than good news. Mr. Kessler, it's a fundamental shift in how humanity is positioned in galactic affairs. Carter's composed demeanor slipped slightly, revealing a flash of fierce satisfaction. For 30 years, we've been the reasonable voice, the mediators, the species that wouldn't rock the boat. Valuable in some contexts, but ultimately limited. She gestured around the cantina, where humans and aliens interacted with a new dynamic, still friendly, but underscored by a subtle reassessment. Now, we're seen as we truly are, a species capable of remarkable restraint, not because we lack capacity for force, but because we understand its cost better than most. Jake considered this. His actions, impulsive, driven by personal outrage rather than strategic calculation, had inadvertently reshaped humanity's position in the galaxy. The thought was simultaneously empowering and terrifying. "I never intended to become a symbol," he said quietly. "The most powerful symbols rarely do," Carter replied. "History is shaped by moments when individuals act according to their nature, revealing deeper truths in the process." She stood, preparing to leave. "The Arbitrator will be docking at Nexus tomorrow for its maiden diplomatic mission. Admiral Cho has requested your presence at the ceremony, if you're amenable." Jake nodded his agreement, though the prospect of more public attention made him uncomfortable. After Carter departed, he finished his whiskey and surveyed the cantina once more. In the corner, where Varkari officers had once mocked human weakness, a mixed group of species now engaged in animated discussion, a human traitor at the center of their attention. Near the viewport, a Drendari mercenary demonstrated combat techniques to an audience that included both aliens and humans. His rumbling voice, carrying phrases like adaptive strategy and controlled aggression that would have been rarely associated with humanity before the brawl. Zeph returned, noticing Jake's thoughtful expression. "Credit for your thoughts?" "Just reflecting on how quickly things change," Jake replied. 6 months ago, humans were the galaxy's diplomats, respected for mediation but not much else. "And now," the Quillian prompted. Jake considered the question. Humanity's position had undeniably improved. Trade terms, colonial rights, security arrangements, all had shifted in Earth's favor. But more fundamentally, the perception had changed. Humans were no longer dismissed as passive observers in galactic affairs. "Now we're seen more completely," he said finally. "Not just as diplomats or warriors, but as both. A species capable of reason and restraint, but also willing to fight when necessary." Zeph's feeding tendrils rippled thoughtfully. "My species has an old saying. True peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice." Perhaps the galaxy needed a reminder that peace without justice is merely submission. Jake nodded, thinking of Mara and the 14 humans who hadn't survived Kestrel 7, of treaties signed under implied duress and negotiations conducted from positions of perceived weakness, of 30 years spent playing a role that represented only part of humanity's complex nature. The reminder was overdue, he said simply. As he prepared to leave, a young human woman approached, her expression hesitant but determined. "Excuse me, you're Jake Kessler, aren't you? The one from the Rust Bucket Brawl?" Jake suppressed a sigh, having grown accustomed to such encounters. "That's me. I just wanted to say thank you." Her eyes shone with unexpected emotion. "My brother was one of the 14 who died on Kestrel 7th. After the Council issued that meaningless censure, I thought there would never be justice or even acknowledgement of what happened." She glanced around the cantina, at the transformed dynamics between species. "Things are different now. Maybe it shouldn't have taken a bar fight to change the galaxy's perception of us, but I'm glad it did." After she left, Jake remained at the bar a moment longer, turning her words over in his mind. The violence in the Rust Bucket hadn't been planned or strategic, just a human response to provocation, revealing something that had always existed beneath the diplomatic exterior humanity had presented to the galaxy. That revelation had shifted the balance in ways that formal diplomacy could not. Not through conquest or domination, but through honest expression of humanity's complete nature, capable of reason and restraint, but also of decisive action when pushed too far. As Jake finally left the cantina, stepping into the bustling corridors of Nexus Station, he reflected that perhaps this was the most important lesson for the galactic community. Humans weren't inherently peaceful or inherently violent. They were inherently human, with all the complexity that entailed. And in a galaxy of diverse species and competing interests, that complexity had finally found its rightful place, not as mediators relegated to the sidelines, but as full participants in shaping the future of interstellar relations. Peace was still the goal, but now it would be peace built on mutual respect rather than perceived weakness. Peace is a choice made by equals, not a role assigned to the seemingly powerless. That, Jake decided as he made his way back to the wayward spirit, was worth a bar fight, and all that had followed.